Hey, we're back for our first segment today with Coach Mazzo and Tarik El-Bashir from the Athletic and TNT. Coach Mazzo from Castleton University. Guys, why we are doing a quote-unquote emergency podcast. It's not really an emergency, but since we've been talking about doing this for a long time, and in the last couple of weeks, we've had the NHL Draft of potential junior hockey players. It didn't go great this year for kids from our area. Maybe fewer than normal were selected. We'll get into the details of that. But first, just a little bit for those of you who are tuning in for the educational aspect, who don't know everything about junior hockey, going to keep it really short and sweet. But in the United States, Canada's another day, another show.
Yep.
In the United States, there's 3 tiers of junior hockey. Tier 1, the only Tier 1 league is the United States Hockey League, the USHL. There's only 16 teams, maybe 17 teams.
Yeah.
These are all
you count the 2
17 with the national development team.
Right.
Yeah. So you're looking at top Division I prospects, NHL prospects. There's only 17 teams and there's 60 D1 schools. So the thing I always tell kids, you want to play in the USHL, it's harder to do that than it is to play D1. All right. So that's the Tier 1. It's tuition free. The kids do not pay to play. We'll keep it simple. We're not going to get into the details there.
Yep.
The only Tier 2 USA Hockey Junior League is the North American Hockey League, which is where Kareem plays. The NAHL, the NAHL, 32-ish, 34-ish teams all over the country.
32. I think it went from 29 to 32.
32.
They're adding 3 teams.
And has 3 more. It's been after years of not expanding, they are expanding, which is great. There's so many kids capable of playing at that level who go unseen and don't get the opportunity.
Right.
You also worry about things getting watered down. But that Tier 2, the NAHL, produces the most D1 players, I think, of any league, like a couple hundred every year. But every kid who plays in that league is going to play D1 or D3. I guess 60 to 70% get D1 opportunities, maybe 60-ish, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah. In all, like right now, and again, like looking at stats from the past, you're right. If looking at stats in their current, I think it's going decreasing a little bit, but it's only decreasing because it's harder to get D1 now than ever before. Right. So
61 teams, 62 teams, and kids can transfer at will.
Yep. And NHL draft picks getting scratched from a D1 team, and they'll transfer to another D1 team to get an opportunity, and that pushes someone else down.
And more kids coming from overseas too.
Correct.
A lot more overseas.
And that's the one thing. And again, expands the conversation a little bit, but when kids in our country say they want to play D1, especially in our area, non-traditional areas, they're looking at the lacrosse kids and they're looking at the soccer kids, the kids that are committing when they're 11th graders. And they're freaking out. Like, I haven't committed for hockey yet. I want to play D1, but there's 60 some D1 hockey schools, right?
Yes.
So there's 70 D1 lacrosse schools. And everyone likes to say, well, they're the same. There's hundreds of D2 and D3 lacrosse schools.
Yes.
My daughter played D3 lacrosse for a top 10 team. I think there were 250 some D3 lacrosse schools. So there's only 85 D3 hockey.
Yeah.
Right. So you're looking at 150 NCAA varsity programs. So D1 the odds are against you.
Yep.
Doesn't mean you can't do it. D3 is like mid-level D1 for other sports in terms of the level of play. And it's getting better.
Yep.
Because just like D1's harder, D3 is harder because these D1 kids that are with the transfer portal, new kids are coming in, the COVID year, everybody gets an extra year still. Those kids keep getting pushed down the lineup.
Yeah,
eventually they want to play.
Yep.
So now they're coming to you. Now the NAHL kids that are waiting till the last minute for the D1 offers aren't getting the offers. They're coming down to D3. So it's kind of a vicious cycle right now where it's all getting better. And, if you're in the NAHL, you're going to play D1 or D3.
Yes.
If you're in the USHL, you're going to play D1, you're going to play pro.
Yep.
And then there's Tier 3, which is this whole pay to play. We've forgot the NCDC, another Tier 2 league that is not USA Hockey, also tuition free. Slight notch below the NAHL is the NCDC, and that's in the Northeast. And that's a great opportunity for kids because if you play in that league, you're going to play NCAA hockey for the most part, and you're in the Northeast and you can get seen every day. The one drawback about the NAHL is if you're out playing in Shreveport or you're playing in Texas and you're a bottom 6 kid, it might be tougher to get seen a lot than it is. You may not fall in love with a kid you only see once. You may fall in love with a lesser kid who's close who you see 20 times.
Yeah.
Although if you're in the NAHL and they come to Castleton, you're going to take them, right?
Well, yeah. So that's the kicker of the league, right? It's what your coaching staff and how much they value that league. So we value the null a lot on different types of pieces, but the biggest one is the physicality along the walls. The physicality along the walls under pressure is so much higher in the null than it is in the NCDC, and it translates to college hockey so well. And it's
is that bigger and older kids?
Bigger, older, stronger, or just understands how to chip a puck out, right? Doesn't always necessarily need to make a play on the puck, but just get it out or grab your guy or be able to block shots or stay in lanes. Like, yeah, as much as I would love to have an NCDC kid with, you know, let's say 30 to 40 points, if there's really only like room in our lineup for some guy that has to come in and play a bottom six role right now, that 40-point guy is probably not going to do as much as maybe the 10-point in the null guy does for us. Right. So I think I just think
he's going to have the advantage over the 10-point NCDC or EHL guy who will do those things. Yeah. But that guy played at a little higher level.
A little higher level and probably does it a little better. You know, like there's always outliers. There's always kids in the null that you might be like, I could find a better kid in tier 3. There's always those outliers. But for the majority of people, if you've been able to substantially play over 40 games in the null, you're going to easily slide into D3. You should have no problem being at least a person that's going to be an everyday guy. Maybe not be a producer, but be an everyday guy.
And my son played in the NCDC. Kareem was also drafted in the NCDC by the same organization, oddly enough. Wonder how that happened. But the NCDC was definitely more of a, I would call a preppish league. It's fast. It's skilled.
Yes.
And it's a great stepping stone. What people don't realize about the NCDC, when you're getting a recruiting pitch for juniors, and sorry, EHL coaches, when the EHL coaches say we're just as good as the NCDC, the reality is that the level of play is different.
Yes.
There's kids in the EHL who definitely can play in the NCDC. There's no doubt about that. But there's also a reason that when a kid leaves the NCDC, the EHL, which is a tier 3 league, we'll get into that in a second, they want that kid.
Yeah.
The NCDC will have 35 or 40 D1 commits in the league. They just happen to be younger kids who have committed and want to stay in the Northeast, want to stay near home. And a lot of those kids, if they have a good year, go to the NOL. Some have gone to the USHL.
Yeah.
So it's a high level play. It's a great stepping stone league. And I don't think it gets enough credit for that. And I think that's happening more. As an example, Kareem was drafted. We got him a few games with Connecticut Junior Rangers in the NCDC last year. And, you know, I don't know, maybe that pushed the Black Bears to say, hey, this kid can do this. We're going to take him.
Yeah, I would say that certainly helped. I think he scored a goal in his first game, and the Black Bears, you know, sent him congratulatory texts. I think that might have, you know, sparked things there. But the reason I wanted him to play a few NCDC games last year, and I wanted him to play in all games, I was hoping they would have been closer together, so he could have gotten a feel for. They ended up being split apart by several months, but it was a good kind of barometer for, you know, how the leagues play, what the quality of competition is like, you know, how big is that delta between your first line left wing and your fourth line left wing. You know, I feel like in the NCDC sometimes it's pretty big. In the NOL it's a little tighter. In the USHL not that big a difference. And you know, it's funny. I can hear my kids. My son is upstairs right now making breakfast. He's got a Black Bears camp game here shortly, and he's got a buddy who's staying with us for the week, who played in New England in a prep school environment. And so I'm going to go and watch this game today. I just watched him compete in Youngstown for 6 days, and now I'm going to go watch him at Piney Orchard. And that's going to give me, and I think it's going to give him, a pretty good idea of the gap, right? Or the difference. I mean, when he played, you know, the past few games, I mean, in Youngstown, the amount of space that's available, I mean, it closes so quick. He played on a line with Brandon Svoboda, who's going to be probably a second round draft pick in Nashville in a couple of weeks. And I remember, you know, Kareem comes off the ice and he was like, that was really fast. He was like, he goes, on that give and go, that puck was back on my stick. I couldn't even say that was a give and go. It was a give, and it was already back on my stick. You know, I was like, yeah, well, that's what NHL draft picks look like. You know, that was his 4th year of doing Youngstown, and that was the first time that it looked, and he probably felt like he belonged on that ice with the top players because he had just done a full year in the NOL. You know, I think
that's the advantage too. Having done that, he got an opportunity to play with those kids where A lot of times, if you go to a USHL main camp, you're just a regular kid. They don't know.
Right.
You don't get that opportunity. You don't even, those kids aren't even playing until the weekend.
Yeah. Although I will tell you, Youngstown this year, to their credit, like I said, this was our 4th year of doing it. Like their 07s were ridiculous. I don't know if that's because they won the Clark Cup and like everyone wanted to come, but like their 07s were like, that dude could play in the null right now. Like he's not very big, but holy crap, he's good. It's a different level, but my feeling, this is like I said, the 4th year we've done it, but it's the 2nd year where he's gone straight from Youngstown straight into Black Bears with like only a couple days break. I feel like he's a little tired, but I think it sharpens him, like the first couple of games, he's going to be really sharp, where a lot of kids are going to be put in their skate zone for the first time in 4 or 5 weeks.
I think there's two sides of that, because he's comfortable knowing, nothing's ever guaranteed in hockey, but he earned his spot with the Black Bears. He's fairly comfortable. He's got a role. He's going to play this year, hopefully move up the lineup at the least.
He's got to clean the locker room after every practice here in camp. So I was like, yeah, you're good.
So there's that. And then there's the kid, so my son, he had to go from NCDC camp with 1 break to
I remember you telling me this. Yeah.
When he's still trying to figure out which team he's going to play for, where he's, what he's going to make or whatever. Yeah. And the Connecticut camp in the NCDC, and I say this all the time, was the best camp I'd ever seen in terms of the level, the compete level. They practiced, they did off ice, they played 2 games, and then the All-Star game. Yeah. This is the first year of the NCDC. These kids are like going balls out to make this team. This All-Star game was like a 2-to-1, like up and down, back and forth. And these were 40 kids that probably 35 of them ended up playing tier 2. So it was the best camp game I've ever seen, but it was exhausting. Then they take them to the showcase. So the NCDC does the showcase, and they take those kids there to make their final decisions on whether they're going to bring them to training camp. So you're playing 8 games at camp, then you're playing 3 more games at the showcase. Then we had a day off. We went to Nantucket and just did nothing. And then he went to generals camp, and he had to play 2 games a day for 4 more days. And then an all-star game. And frankly, he was burned for generals camp, and he did fine. He went to the all-star game, and he was a 3rd round pick for them. But he had done so much with Connecticut. He was really comfortable with them, and he wasn't as comfortable with the generals. The generals only won 4 games the year before their first year. And he was like, Dad, I really think I want to play for Connecticut. But he also said, I don't think I was great here either. Like I think the issue was he didn't solidify his spot with the generals. It was still going to be a training camp down to the wire, see what happens. And he knew he was in with Connecticut. And I just think he wasn't comfortable with how he played, and he was exhausted. So I think it's interesting to hear the 2 different perspectives, because Kareem's just playing hockey, and he's probably enjoying Youngstown and hoping maybe I'd do something and catch their eye. But I know in the back of my mind, I still got a great place to play at the level I want to be at.
It's funny. He got in the car, and I was like, how did it go? He goes, yeah, I got cut. This is at Youngstown last week. I was like, well, he goes, but the head coach and the general managers, they talked to me for the first time in 4 years. I was like, progress, man, progress. Like last year, you were just a dude. This year, they want to tell you what they liked, what they didn't like. Hey, we saw you in Black Bears games. We like this. We want to see more of this from you next season. And let's see you again, 12 months from now. And so now he's like fired up. He's like, all right, let me go have a great null season and see if I can, in my age out year, maybe catch a couple of USHL games. He's motivated for that now.
That's awesome. So that's tier 2. That's the null, the NCDC. The NCDC is expanding west.
Yes.
This year, Coach, just 30 seconds, your opinion. It worries me. I feel like the NCDC has gotten a little watered down, especially with the null expanding. Those kids got to go somewhere, right?
Yep.
More NCDC kids getting drafted in the null. Now we're going west, and the West in hockey has always been literally the Wild West. The Western States League tried to do tier 2, and they brought in a lot of Europeans, and it didn't work out. The USPHL West has not. There's a couple great programs, don't get me wrong, but the level of play has not been at the level of play of some of the Northeastern Premier teams. What are your fears about the NCDC expansion?
Well, I think right now, everyone's kind of trying to figure out what it's going to look like. Is it going to be what the NCDC we thought was going to be when it first started, which was going to be midgets on steroids? We really thought it was going to be a whole bunch of prep school kids, young, ready to go to the USHL. We had USHL kids come down in the NCDC,
right.
In the first year. So
Johnny DeRoche.
We were really looking at okay, is this now going to be and take the step of what the league was always supposed to be? My fear with the league is that during their draft, and I've watched it pretty extensively, I think finding out what your range is going to be very important for those teams. I think, drafting some kids out of Chicago Mission are great. Drafting kids out of North Star Christian Academy are great. Anaheim Junior Ducks. But at the end of the day, you also have to make this kind of thing. Is the kid going to leave the midget organization?
Well, and
I think that's hard.
If 13 midget kids from Chicago get drafted in the USHL,
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you'll probably get one or two.
Yeah, if you're lucky though,
Right.
Like a lot of the midget programs, the one thing you have to be known for is development. I think if you're going to steal a kid from a really, really good midget program, you better be able to develop that young kid. And if you can't, and you're just about winning, I don't think that midget program is going to say, yes, this is the league you should go to. I think they're going to say, hey, stay with us. We'll get you with more scouts. I personally think, and this is maybe 10 seconds of it, but it's going to be, I think, a better league than most people think. I think there's going to be more drive for kids to want to play real juniors. And no offense to the NCDC on the East Coast, but real juniors is that experience of playing in front of fans.
Sure.
It is playing on certain game times. We're not playing at 8 a.m. on a Sunday or a showcase game at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday. I look at it like this: college, you're only going to play at D3 2 times, 7 p.m. on a Saturday, 7 p.m. on a Friday, 4 p.m. on a Saturday.
6:50 if you play in East Boston.
I did not know that. So
you got to work around the Boston, whatever they are, the Terriers or the whoever they are up there.
But I just find it that I get that they do it for the scouts to try to get more scouts there. And I get that, but I think a lot of the kids really would like the production. I think every kid comes into juniors with the same mindset. I'm going to get a billet family. We're going to be a crowd. I'm going to be a guy in the town that people know. And like, as a tier 3,
we billeted a kid last year, by the way, for the Blackbird.
Did you love it?
It was awesome. We had a kid named Gunnar Van Dam, best hockey name ever.
I love it.
It's going to be an action movie hero.
Alaska Anchorage, right?
Alaska Anchorage. He had some D3 looks. He had some early D1 looks. It was great to have my kid watch this kind of happen, right?
Yeah.
To kind of hear the phone calls with the coaches. And last minute, Alaska circled back with him late and made a really good offer. And he was like, you know what? I'm going to learn to ice fish. I'll take it.
I really think a lot of those kids, when they get that experience, it's life-changing. Like, we had 2 kids out of our program, Jersey Shore Whalers, that ended up in Bonnieville instead of ending up in the NCDC. And a big chunk of that was they wanted an experience. They wanted to go out and see what real kind of junior hockey was going to be like. And I think the way that they're marketing the West, just from the Idaho Spud Kings videos and all of that, like, those kids are legends in that town. They're 5,000 people.
There's a local kid on that team, Tyler Rose, who played Team Maryland with my son for a long time. I'm really tight with his dad. I talk to him 3 times a week, and he loves it. Like, he's going back. Like, he said there's like 4,000 fans at his games. Like, they're heroes around town. The uniforms are awesome. The competition's pretty good. He loves it.
I had a few kids that I helped last year that were considering leaving the Northeast. They weren't sure what their college hockey future was. And I said, look, if you want to play D3, you got to stay here. But if you want to go out and play in front of thousands of fans and you want to go live in that area of the country and hunt and fish and see a beautiful part of the world that we don't get to see very often, I said, that's a life experience. If you're going to take a year or two to do this, getting the life experience is just as fun, just as valuable, especially if you're not sure. There's nothing guaranteed in hockey. I mean, there's a lot of kids, and again, another topic, but we can say you're a D3 hockey player, or you can be a D3 hockey player, but what does that mean? Does that mean you can play for Adrian or Geneseo or Utica or Norwich? Or does that mean you can play for one of the bottom end schools that maybe the education isn't great and maybe they can't beat anybody in D3, whereas Adrian might beat some of the Atlantic D1 teams, right? So you say you could be a D3 player. That's all over the map. So to me, go somewhere where you're going to love it.
Yep.
where you're going to play, where they do move people up just in case you're good enough. But that life experience, you got to learn to live on your own and have some fun. And that's part of it too, I think.
And that's what, honestly,
Sorry, Coach.
oh, no, you go.
I would say, I kind of got to see that firsthand, with the Black Bears last year. I mean, most of the kids committed D1, but there were some kids who had gone D3 the year before, and so I'm starting to, after one full year and then now I'm starting to listen. Right now, I'm like, okay, what are people saying about my kid? Is he, maybe could he hang on for dear life at low D1? Could he be a better player at top D3? What does he want? Where does he fit? And you're right. I just in listening to kids when they come back, as alumni to the Black Bears, after doing a year in college, it's, happiness is so important. I mean, and some kids will go to Ohio State and play 15 games in 4 years and love their experience and just say that was the greatest time of my life. I didn't play very much, but I practiced with some studs all day. That kid's gonna be playing on hockey night in a couple of years. That was awesome. And there's some kids that are gonna be like, nah, after not playing very much their freshman year, I'd rather go D3. And then there's some kids who started D3 and are like, this is the greatest experience of my life. This was the right size university. It was the right balance between academics and my athletics. And I just loved my experience. So, I think, for me, I can only speak from my experience. Like those gears are starting to turn in my head now. Kareem is not at the point where he's being recruited heavily yet, but he's starting to get text messages from Division III coaches. A couple of D1 guys have reached out, and so I'm starting to research the schools, and I'm starting to look at, by the way, the price of some of those New England Division III schools. Oh my God!
We'll talk off the record about that.
I'm not at that point yet, but sometimes I just Google, X school and tuition. And I go, oh. give me some water.
My daughter played D3 lacrosse at the top 10, and it was
yeah.
I've told Kareem I'll pay the bill, but understand you might be cutting into your inheritance at this point.
And that's something I try to tell kids all the time. I mean, hockey is great. And it's great to be part of your college experience if it can be. And it really can be. Almost any of these kids that we talk to, it can be. And it can be good.
Yeah.
Even if it is club or, ACHA or AAU or whatever, CHF is now the AAU. Like, imagine going to Penn State and being a D2 player on their ACHA team and playing all the time in that arena.
Yeah.
Going to the football games, going to the basketball game. Like, it's a different animal. At the end of the day, wherever you go, college is
gotta be happy.
College is an adjustment, right?
Yeah.
College is an adjustment. Even if you're going to play club, these club teams are really good. You may sit.
Yeah.
You may not play every game. If hockey goes a little sideways and you're not playing all the time, which is very likely as a freshman, right? Unless you're Stephen Alliday or somebody of that level, right? You better be happy. Like the kids at Suffolk, it's a mid-level D3 program. It plays in a great conference. It's in Boston. There's only 2 D3 schools in Boston.
Yep.
The kids who don't play, they love it.
They'll love it. You're in Boston.
The kids who don't play at, I don't know, Lake Forest probably don't love it as much. Well, that's Chicago area, right? Or close to
Close.
But the point is, like, those kids, like, they love their teammates, they love the city, and it's an opportunity that not many D3 kids get. And wherever you go, like you gotta love it, because you could get hurt, you could get scratched, and if you don't like where you're at, everything falls apart.
Yes.
Also, if I can just chime in with one more thing, I've only seen a handful of NCAA games in person in my life. I mean, when you cover the NHL, you're usually in an NHL rink, but I've seen probably 5 or 6 D1 games, and I've seen 1 Division III game, and I had Kareem with me, and it was Tufts at Stevenson. Ooh. And that was the hardest, most physical. Now that rink is really, really cold, so we almost froze to death. But oh my God, was that level high? Like
we're in the rink right now. There's the Joe Stevens behind us.
I mean, Kareem walked out to the car with me, and he was like, he's seen a couple Division I games with me. He was like, those guys were all. He's looking at the roster. He's like, they're all 24. They're all killing each other out there. He goes, Dad, I think the only difference between like some of those players and the guys we see in D1 is like 3 inches, right? Like that guy was 5'9" instead of 6'1", because he was just as skilled and just as good. I was like, yeah, That's pretty close. That's pretty accurate.
That's been the cool part about what I've done here with working with Coach Dawes and Stevenson in their rink is when I first started our summer league, those kids, we had 8 to 10 of those kids come in. I let them play for free. And the reason being I wanted the kids in our area to experience being on the ice with them. Like it's limited contact, but just to see the speed. And the kid that comes up to me and says, I want to play D1. I'm like, oh, you want to play D1? Well, that D3 guy just kicked your butt, just so you know. But then all these kids started gravitating toward that and wanting to be part of it, which was really, really cool and helped us build something that it exceeded my expectations. It's really fun. It's the most fun thing that I do. But a couple things that we're going to take this in whatever direction it leads us, right?
Yeah.
So you talked about the NCDC maybe being better, and I'm sure you were more in tune with the NAL draft, Tarik, than I mean, I watched it pretty closely.
Oh, yeah,
but it just seemed to me like both those leagues this year, there's more Canadians coming in this year.
Well, yeah.
Am I wrong? Am I wrong with that? Or it seems like we've got to, maybe we're expanding the leagues. We better go find some more kids who can play at that level.
Well, there's a shakedown out of the BC right now, especially with Americans. Now, like, I think there's some advisors that are skeptical of how the British Columbia Hockey League is going to turn out this year. I am not.
After leaving Hockey Canada, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
right.
I think it's going to be better than they actually think. I think there's a lot of Canadian kids out there that flew under the radar that people don't really look at. Like Penticton just signed the McPherson twins. I don't think people understand, like, they're 2 UNH commits out of the GoJ that most people don't even know existed.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of Canadian kids now that are shuffling over there now that there's no restrictions.
Sure.
The side part of that is now the Americans in that league, it seems like, are coming back down to the null. And I shouldn't say down, right? It's a lateral move,
Sure,
whichever way you want to look
Again,
at it.
different style of play,
Different
right?
style of play.
David Bondra, Peter's son, skated with us a few times, and he's played for the Slovakian national team and the World Juniors and stuff. Plays pro in Europe, played in the KHL for a while. He came out and skated a few times, and he went to the USHL and had a pretty good rookie year.
Yep.
The next year they cut him, and he went to the BC and scored like 60 points, and Michigan State signed him.
Yep.
Right. So, but he said that fit my style of play better.
Yeah. And I think we're going to get into this later on, or maybe in a different discussion, but there is a tier 2 league, I think, for every player in terms of their style that they play. I think at that point, though, you have to really dig deep on it. And you have to figure out what that style and what you kind of leverage your own skills to fit that league. But yeah, no, I looked at the NAL draft this year. It's the first year ever. I think they've taken more Canadian juniors than they took out of U18, which is the first big thing I think I've ever seen, because they used to take a lot of U18 players. And now you're seeing
less prep too, I think.
Yeah, less prep. And you're seeing a lot more Canadian junior, a lot more kids coming out of, let's say, the OJ, the CC, the SJ, the AJ, the MJ, and the BC. But
some of those are American kids who went to Canada and now are coming back home too. Like Van Dam, our billet last year was that situation. He went to Canada. It was okay. He had an okay experience, but he kind of wanted to be closer where he could see his parents more often. And
I think 500 to 600 American kids over historically have gone to play at that junior A level in Canada on a semi and like pretty much every year. I know that came way down with COVID, obviously.
Yeah.
And I don't think that it's quite recovered, which should benefit the NAL. Maybe this is why all this expansion is happening. Maybe those kids are more likely to stay here now.
Yeah.
Or come back here, like you said.
I mean, look, I don't know anyone from the NAL. I don't know why, like what their main reason for expanding is, but I just know in watching the Black Bears last year, the cuts that you have to make throughout the year, those kids are so close. Like, you're just so heartbroken for them. You're like, you're not any worse than the kid who stayed. You're just maybe an inch shorter, or you were a righty when they needed a lefty. Go ahead. Sorry. I was gonna say, those kids deserve a place to play. I think. I mean, like there were 3 or 4 kids last year where, like, you see the roster and you're like, what happened to? You just can't keep them all, right?
As soon as that happens, right, you get guys like him circling around saying, "Hey, you want to come in for the second semester?" And then you got the NCDC guys that are taking all those kids too if they don't make it in the NAL.
Yeah, so I think adding 3 teams, I think, will give some of those bubble guys or guys who just caught a bad break because they didn't fit, one way or another. Hopefully we'll start seeing those kids resurface with Rochester and what was the other team in our division?
Rochester, New Hampshire,
and Colorado.
In Colorado, yeah. So I mean, I do hear people talk about, is it going to get watered down? I don't know. I don't know if adding 3 more teams is going to water it down. I think I do feel like if the USHL expanded, that might result in some more, like those elite top guys. I don't know how many guys are getting left off those rosters who could literally, legitimately be contributors at that level. I mean, having seen a lot of the NOL this year, like I did see probably 5 kids where I was like, that kid could be on Youngstown.
Right.
But, but I didn't see a bunch of kids where I was like, man, the USHL needs to be 25 teams. But conversely, I think the NOL can safely expand to 32 without big drop off.
I think we say it's from the top down, right? There's more D1 players than there are D1 schools.
Yep.
Right. There's probably more D3 players now than D3, but in the juniors, it's the same way.
Yep.
There's
that's a good point.
And again, do you want to be the 13th, 12th forward on the USHL team, or do you want to go play in the top 6 in the NOL where you're going to get a D1 offer if you're a top 6 NOL?
I think you're also touching on the same exact point that gets made with the expansion. It's not just the NOL. It's also, you have 2 new OJ teams. You have 2 resurrected OJ teams, if you will, Buffalo Junior Sabres and Leamington Flyers coming back into it. You now have a whole bunch of expansion in the NCDC West.
Right.
So there's going to be some little shake. Like, would you rather be a top line guy in Buffalo Junior Sabres or the NCDC than be a bottom guy on Colorado Grit? There's going to be some there. I personally think that NOL is going to have no problem expanding in this. I think I'm really excited to watch Rochester, to be honest with you.
My son played in Rochester in the NCDC, and it's a shame. It was a very poorly run organization.
The Monarchs,
but the town, it's a hockey town. They came out to watch the junior team. He loved it there. He ultimately got traded because he was an age out. He needed to go to a better situation. He got traded to the Boston area, and then the rest is history. Like, he loved it. I loved Rochester.
I did too. I thought Fairport was awesome when I was there, and I watched him play. We got a goalie my first year ever coaching at the Jersey Shore Whalers, Kevin Lake, who's in Hamline. He was our first ever goalie we got, and our first ever kid that we pushed up to tier 2. But that came out of that main camp.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm excited. Chris, the Rochester kind of staff excites me because I know what they did in midget hockey a lot. I know obviously the BK Selects,
right,
and how that's going to kind of merge into that team. So I'm excited to see.
That's a smart affiliate.
I'm excited. I think it's going to be a lot. It's going to have it should, and I don't want to crap on any team. So it should easily come into the NOL, unlike maybe the experience Northeast and Danbury had in their first year.
Gotcha. So real quick, we'll get onto the DMV situation. The 3rd tier junior hockey is pay to play. Generally, you pay $9,000, $10,000, $11,000 to play. And it's all over the country. There's the EHL.
Yep.
The lower level of the EHL is called the EHL Premier. The USPHL. The USPHL Premier is the lower level, and they're affiliated with the NCDC.
Yep.
Same ownership, same organization. And then there's the NA3, the North American Tier 3 Hockey League, which is affiliated with the NOL.
Yep.
And just real quickly, EHL definitely sends more kids to D3 than any.
Yep.
The USPHL Premier, there's some really good programs that send kids to D3.
Yep.
And the NA3 has a few that send kids to D3 regularly, but also for some older kids that actually can be a route to get to the NOL.
Yeah.
If the team's affiliated, if they call kids up, it's still very, very hard, but it is older kids that can do it. Everybody's route's different. Everybody's path is different.
I will be honest with everyone here. If you are actually good enough to be a contributor at D3, a D3 school will find you. It's like, whether it's the NA3, USP Prim, or EHL, we're going to find you. I find the EHL has more depth than any league in tier 3 in terms of their 4th line, 3rd line being very strong, stronger than a lot of US Prim's 2nd lines, which, I think creates that what they're looking for in that league, which is more parity and more competition. The NA3 is just it's a diver. Like, you got to dive for diamonds. So you got to find kids with, there's some kids. There was one kid, he ended up in Hamline this year, Whitmore, who ended up at St. Cloud, who played like 40 something games. University of Dubuque just got a Thomas Geish, who played some 40 something games in the NOL. who dropped to the NA3 for Great Falls Americans in Montana. Like, you know, like but like we know these players, we keep a track of these players, especially with the guys that are dropping out of the NAL, we keep tracks of them. But like also like Granite City, I think Granite City had like 5 or 6 D3 commits this year, which is very unusual to see out of one program, just like Hudson Havoc in the US Premier.
Hudson Havoc.
They had like 7 guys.
The Metro Jets.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Northern Cyclones do a good job with that. And
the East ones, I really don't count because I feel like you're just so around the area of D3 that the Western, like the Midwest,
you're going to see those kids, and if they're good enough, they're going to get it. That's the advantage of being in the North.
Yeah, that's, you know, let's put it this way: it cost me about $400 to get to Blaine, Massachusetts. Blaine, Minnesota. It cost me maybe $20 to get to Boston, Massachusetts to see a game.
Right.
So obviously we don't have the biggest recruiting budget, even though if you look at our recruits, it kind of looks like we do. It looks like we travel a lot.
Because you're driving your dad's car everywhere.
Probably. I bought it off. No, I just.
So the reason for the emergency podcast, I'm not going to go into great detail, but the USHL draft was held recently. Phase 1, which was for 07s. And that's what we need to realize too, is they're drafting 08s next year in the USHL, right? And then the phase 2 of the draft is for any kid who's junior eligible. So that could be 07 on up to this year 03, right? So in phase 1, only one kid from quote our area was drafted, Blake Montgomery. And was that Blake was the only one, right?
Yeah, MSC.
And so I'm losing my mind here. Hold on. Let me check my notes here. There were 0 players in phase 1. In phase 2, we had 6 players from our area. So, but most of the players who are getting drafted by the USHL are kids that leave home relatively early. Blake is from Bowie. He played in Philly. He played at Mount St. Charles. He played at Seacoast Performance Academy. Most of the kids in the USHL that are getting drafted from our area leave home. There's a couple, Dimitri Cabro, right? Played with the Black Bears. Great story there too, because he was struggling at the beginning to get time and was ready to leave. I got an NCDC coach that called me and said, is this kid good? Because he might be leaving the Black Bears. We might take him. And I said, yeah, he's really good. But then he got it, to his credit, he got his chance and now he's a D1 commit. But so normally we have 4 or 5 from our area in phase 1. We have another few in phase 2. I think there were 6 in phase 2, but again, most of them had moved away. The NAL, we had 1 drafted in the NAL this year. Normally it's 6 or 7. I think part of that is the Black Bears trying to keep some kids here, trying to, tender kids or give kids that opportunity. We have a local kid who plays in our showcase and plays in our league, Grant, I won't say his last name, who I think the Black Bears are looking at, who should have been drafted in the NAL, in my opinion. Really, really good player. But the point being, normally there's 7 or 8 kids drafted in the NAL. There's more kids drafted in the USHL. The 0 in phase 1 and the 1 in the NAL is concerning to me. And I'm just curious, you see our kids, you work with our kids, you're in the middle of it, your kid's in the NAL, you're in the DMV. Like, what do we think is happening? Why aren't we getting more?
I mean, in my opinion, and this is a conversation I have with my kid from time to time, usually on long car rides back from wherever, and we're kind of reminiscing. He's always like, can you imagine if we had just kept all of the 04s who scattered all over the place in this area? He goes, we would have had half of a USHL team and, half of a NAL team.
Right.
But those kids and their parents made the decision around 13 or 14 to that the level of competition and level of coaching and maybe the level of seriousness and dedication just wasn't going to get them from the DMV to where they wanted to be. And, it worked out for some. Some kids went away and got really, really good and are now on NHL Central Scouting. And there's some kids who went away and got lost in the shuffle and probably wish they didn't go away because they just became a prep school kid who got lost in the sauce a little bit, right? So I think for me, it begins with keeping some of those kids here, giving them options here to stay local. The way you do that is you make competitive AAA teams here, right? I mean, we considered briefly leaving. I just couldn't let my son. He's my only son.
I'm with you.
Send him away, but we had opportunities to send him to prep schools and other places.
Same here.
And there were And it usually comes after a bad AAA season where you get stomped by BK and stomped by Little Caesars and other places, and you're like, well, my kid wants to play college hockey, and we just got smoked 7-1 or 5-1 by whoever, and those kids are trying to do the same thing he's doing. He wants to do it. Am I making a mistake by keeping him here?
Yeah.
So I think education, talking, maybe better communication with parents, but more importantly, like, maybe at a younger age, you just have to get these kids to commit to sticking here. I mean, just at 11 or 12, but listen, if we all stay, this is going to be a very good team that can play a very competitive schedule, and you'll get to where you want to go. But if we start peeling off our first line left wing, and then our first line right wing, and then our number 1D, and then both our goalies go to prep school, like all of a sudden, you're not quite as deep, and you're not good enough to get into those top showcases and those top tournaments. And maybe, and I know a lot of parents probably don't want to hear this, but not everyone at every birth year is a AAA player. They might get there, but just because you want your kid to play AAA and have the fancy uniform in the bag at 12 years old, Kareem wasn't ready that first year.
No.
Went to Little Caps and didn't get picked. And
some of those kids, it's too much too early, and they burn out eventually. Playing 70 games, you're traveling, you have no social life, and by the time you're 16, it's like lacrosse is looking pretty good.
The best thing ever for him was to go back to Ashburn Extreme and play first line left wing and get all those touches and play on power play and pit. If he had made Little Caps that first year, he would have been fourth line left wing who didn't play a whole lot.
Yeah.
And so, I think parents have to have realistic expectations. But I also, and I don't know if maybe Team Maryland and Little Caps, I mean, I know there's not a whole lot of love lost there, but I mean, is there enough in this area to make a really competitive team at 2 birth years? Maybe some years. I think some birth years there are, especially if you can keep those kids from leaving. Maybe, I remember when the 04s first hit AAA, there probably were enough to make a good Team Maryland and good Little Caps. But once those kids start bleeding off and going to prep school and leaving, now it's like if you take the top half of one program, the top half, and you put it, you might be good enough to compete with those top teams. Like, I don't know if they need to start making the rules a little harder for movement, or do what some other states do, and what Canada does, which is, hey, you were born in Rockville, Maryland, you're playing for Team Maryland. You're born in Arlington, Virginia, you're playing for Little Cap.
Right.
Like, you're not going to wherever else. And if you want to go to out of state, you gotta, whatever the punishment is, right? Sure. So I don't know if there's a mechanism you can put in like that, but I mean, I can only speak from the experience of 2004s. Like, there's 5 or 6 kids who were in the USHL last year that are from like 10 miles from here.
The 03s and 04s, that group, and a lot of them have come back and played in my league from time to time. A lot of them, they went to New Jersey Rockets, North Jersey Avalanche, Mount St. Charles. Blake Montgomery he's younger, but he went to Seacoast and then to Mount St. Charles. A lot of them ended up at Mount St. Charles.
Yep. A
lot of them did end up getting drafted in the USHL and are either playing there or in the NAL right now. And most of them are D1 commits or are going to be, like Will Lawrence is probably going to be. He's one of the ones who is not. But you got Matt Brill is committed to Brown. Ben Robertson's committed to Cornell. Cam O'Neill was drafted in the NHL. And they're all buddies. They're all buddies. They went different places and ended up at the same goal. And it's really amazing that, I mean, those kids, like you, that's a top 10 Team Maryland team if they stay easily.
Yeah.
Your thoughts from the college perspective as a guy who works with our kids?
No. It's a lot of fear of missing out, I think, at certain ages. I think at certain ages, parents look at the social media that's coming through. They're seeing this kid committing, this kid doing it, and they think that's the right choice to make. I think, and we went through this in New Jersey because you only have 2 AAA teams here, if you technically, right? We had the same thing in New Jersey. When I played hockey, there was 5 AAA teams. Now there's probably 15 AAA teams in New Jersey. But the market for hockey is there, meaning you have this market of affluence and you have this market that wants their kid in this sport. So here I find the same thing in Maryland and Virginia. It's a big market for affluent players that want to play this sport and take it seriously. That's also a breeding ground for poaching though, right? So like if you are a certain affluence, kind of like even California kids, where you're paying a certain price to play at this level, there's schools that can come in there underneath that price and start poaching your players. Sure. And that's something I think the organizations need to take seriously about. Like what we did in Jersey was we just started making our AAA options cheaper. So what ended up happening was, yeah, you would get this offer from prep school, but now the difference is, 15 to 20 grand to send your kid there. And it's not, just a wash. Like when I played, it was a wash. It was, you're sending your kid to private school, which is already costing you 15 to 20 grand. And then you're playing AAA, which is also costing you 10 grand. So at that point, you're already up to 25 to 30 grand. And it's like, well, why wouldn't I just send my kid to prep school for that price?
Yeah.
And that's what the argument for a lot of parents were, well, I thought this was supposed to be about education. So why wouldn't I send my kid to the best education spot it's supposed to be? I think honestly, in this area, the biggest thing is just getting education at a younger age. We discovered in Jersey that the best route for that was at U14, the education factor, like getting parents into that.
Sure, that makes sense.
Some organizations tried really hard to do it when kids were in the squirt age with the brick tournament. I know like there's 2 organizations in New Jersey that are very big on that. And they start their education piece then. However, what we found at that age, if you start the education factor, those parents are more prone to I need my kid on a super team. I need my kid on a top 10 AAA team in the nation every year because D1 scouts are looking and they're always going to look. And I think people miss the entire picture. You are playing until you're 21 regardless.
There's no shortcut.
You are. Unless you're that good, and trust me, you'll know you're that good, you're going to play till you're 21 regardless. So what development path does your kid need to make to be the best player he can be by the age of 21?
Right.
And I think that if you look at that in a longer term development model, you can plan it out a lot easier. I just think there's so much fear of missing out. There's so much fear of, well, Johnny did X, so Billy needs to do X. And
what's best for Johnny isn't always best for Billy. Yeah, and what's going on in soccer and baseball and basketball isn't going on in hockey. It is a marathon.
Yes,
it is a marathon.
It is, and you have to take it as such. And you have there's peaks and valleys in every kid's career. I don't you talked about Kareem getting cut Washington Caps and ending up at Ashburn Extreme AA. Ashburn Extreme, from me and my perspective, is one of the best AA programs you can get in the nation. It's one of the top 5 or 10 in the nation for AA, which is, again, they have a great development model. They develop kids. I don't think there's a fear there of pushing kids to AAA. In New Jersey, we have it a little bit backwards, where we have some really strong AA programs, but there's a lot of fear of losing kids to AAA. But what we found in New Jersey was the best 14U Bantam AA players, by the time they go into midgets, a majority of them will take the spots of the bottom half of AAA.
It's amazing. You only get the benefit of this once you've gone through it.
Yes.
But when you look back at those super teams that were, I'm saying this for Northern Virginia, like where they got all the best players on that first 12-year-old team. There's like 2 kids that are still playing. It's like, and also, and one of them didn't make the team. Like it doesn't matter that much at 12. It's not that serious.
Well, I go back and look at the kids that went to Charlotte out of the Pivaha, out of our district. They went from our district to the USA Hockey camp in the Southeast district. The kids that were 98s. I think Devin, my son, and Dylan Giorgio played D3. A couple kids left home really early and played D1. That's about it out of the 98. Our 98 class was good too. Like they just aren't playing.
I don't want to hijack this, but that's one of my biggest issues that I've had in Kareem's development was that there were a couple of years where Kareem met the criteria to make that camp and just wasn't selected. And I go back and I look at where those kids are now, and I'm like, you know what? I was kind of right. But also what really got me was a lot of those kids who were getting picked from our district had gone to like Shattuck and other places. I was like, they They've been gone for 3 years. Are like
Right.
their mailing address might be Southeastern District, but they aren't from here. They learned to play hockey in Minnesota.
Devin made it the first time when he was moving from A to AA. He made it, and I was shocked that it was fair. I'm like, they actually took a kid who hasn't played at that level, who's good enough. That was amazing. The next year, he made it and went to the Blue-Gray game in Charlotte. For those who don't know, that's like there's one final game at the district where they pick the kids who go to national camp. So it starts at 6 or 8 teams, and they get it down to 2. There's one game, all the scouts come, and then they pick their kids, like 6 kids who go to national camp. The third year, the Little Caps coaches ran. He had gone to the final game the year before. The third year, he turned Little Caps down. They cut him. He did not go to Charlotte at all after he had been 2 years in a row and made it to the Blue-Gray game. There's big issues with how that whole thing is run.
Yeah.
That's definitely another pod for another day, but you're 100% right with that.
I got lucky. I was one of the players in my district to make it out of AA. So I was very, very fortunate enough. But that's, again, like and this is going back some years, but I was a 90 birth year. My coach, growing up, I had a few different ones, but my main one was Noel Rubin, who now runs the whole Rockets U16 super team programs that are going there. But he used to just do A and AA hockey. And the amount of kids that now I see that came out of a really good developer have moved on. Sure. And that was kind of what I try to now preach to parents a lot. Find the actual developers. Because they're in every area. Like in Jersey, it's the Rubins, it's the Barkless, it's the Latitos and the Mays. Like these guys are actual developers. They take kids in squirts, they develop them all the way until midgets, and then they shoot them,
push them on, and they want to push them on.
And guess what? They go right back down to squirts. Right. There's no like this, oh, I'm just going to stay in midgets and this is what I'm going to do. And I'm just the midget coach. I'm going to take this group, I'm going to build them up, I'm going to make them the best players I can possibly make. And yeah, I may lose kids along the way that want better opportunity, but I'm also going to help them. And guess what? They keep coming back to even their skill sessions in the summer. So yeah, I may have left you for Mount St. Charles. You may have helped me, but I'm always going to come back to you because I know you got me there. And I think that one thing that lacks here is true developers. I think you have a lot of I think there's good coaches and I think there's good businessmen. I don't see a lot of what I would say great coaches and bad businessmen, which are usually developers. Developers are usually the worst business people you'll have. They'll lose money in the deal to just make kids.
I'm not a developer, but I'm not a good businessman. That's for sure.
to make kids actually move on. So I always find that intriguing when I talk to parents, especially like, what are you looking for in a coach in a program? Well, I'm looking for them to play against the top 20 competition and I want to go against them. Okay, cool. How's your kid going to get better? Oh, well, he's playing against them. He's just going to get better from that. And it's like, that's an osmosis theory of development. There's not a targeted approach there. What does your kid need? What is this coach good at? Does your kid's concepts fit the team concepts? Like, is his weaknesses going to make this coach go crazy?
Yeah.
Because if that's the case, your kid's probably not going to get better. Coach is probably going to be mad and your kid's going to sit on the sideline. But like, if the weaknesses are there and the coach is like, that's like those weaknesses I can develop right away.
Yeah.
Like then you're in a good spot. Yeah. Like,
no, I think you're 100% right. I don't, to me, it starts with the coaching and the development.
Yeah.
But getting back, I want to get a couple NHL things. I know you got to run soon. So, but I want to hit on the FOMO real quick. Cause I think FOMO is a big thing now because, much like Kareem, my son Devin played AA till his first year of 18U. He happened to be in a great program. At that time, the Howard program was a big rival with Ashburn, and Ashburn was top 10. We were top 20. We were going to nationals every year. We had great games. Our 16U second year Howard team was better than Team Maryland, which is why Devin stayed. He was captain. They went to nationals. It was half the price. They went up and played in a AAA league and won the regular season and made it to the championship game. He made that decision. And I have to tell you, I would have put him at Team Maryland. He made the decision that was the best thing he ever did. And that's where he started getting seen, was playing in that league. And that's where he finally said, you talked about having opportunities for Kareem. Devin had opportunities. We go visit prep schools. He's like, I got to do that. That's awesome. Then he come back home and hang out with his buddies. He's like, I want to graduate with my buddies. I want to finish school at home. I want to be with my buddies. And then I want to play juniors. And then I want to play in college. He was a terrible decision maker, but he was clear. He was clear on that. So that's when I'm like, I better figure it out.
Yeah.
How are we going to do this? And it can be done.
Yeah.
I think the greatest thing for him was staying at AA and being the best player and being counted on in every situation, so that when the scouts said, look, you're really good, we need to see you play against those kids. Play your second year, 18-year AAA, and we'll see what happens. He did that. He was captain. He led the league in scoring. He got drafted, right? And he stayed home the whole time. The FOMO, not only do the kids try to go play Team Maryland or AAA maybe before they're ready, then they get cut. Now we hate Team Maryland. Now we hate the Little Caps. It's all politics. It's his buddy. It's his buddy. We're good enough. We got screwed. We're going to prep school, but you haven't been recruited by prep school. So now you're on varsity 3 or you're on JV. You never make it to varsity. Then you go back home and you've wasted years of academics and college. So kids that are ultimately going to be able to develop through AA and become capable like our kids did are leaving too early and they're not panning out.
Yes.
It's so funny. Parents come to me a lot and say, hey, my kid didn't make Team Maryland this year, or didn't make Little Caps. We're going to go to prep school. And my first question is, how much are you paying? If you're paying the whole price, you're probably not going to play very much.
Right.
And also think about what you said. Your kid got cut from a mid-Atlantic AAA team, and you're trying to go into Boston with the big fish. That doesn't even make sense to me. Right? Oh, yeah, I never thought about that. I was like, yeah, wait till you see a kid like a first line left wing, from one of these good prep schools. Wait till you see what he looks like on the ice.
Matt Connor from Avon this year.
Yeah. So, I think parents need to be more realistic about what they want, and also if this is what you want and this is what your kid wants, the kids that went to Reston and Ashburn at 5:30 and 6 in the morning before school, everyone called us crazy for going to these skill lessons. A lot of them panned out. There's no substitute for hard work.
Right.
No, there isn't. And
now I don't want to see you dragging your kid out of your BMW at 6 in the morning and he doesn't want to go and he's yawning. And I want the kids who are waking you up at 4:30 going, hey, we got to be at Reston in a little bit.
Sure.
Give me breakfast. Those kids.
Those
kids are gonna turn out.
It's like that with everything. The kids need to be figuring out the programs they're interested in. They need to be talking to coaches. They need to be telling you at least, hey, I want to do this. It's not you saying you should do that. That's hard as a parent. I mean, I walked the fine line between pushing and easing up. I knew Devin loved hockey, but I also knew that he loved it so much that when he said, Dad, I need a break, he needed a break because he really loved it. So you have to, it is a fine line, but the level of commitment in this area for 99% of the people isn't at what it needs to be for their kids to go where they want them to go. And that's a really hard thing to complain, because playing hockey in this area is a commitment no matter what. But to really get there, the commitment is off the charts, just like the compete level is off the charts. And those, to me, in a nutshell, are the things that are missing, along with maybe some of the development of a coaching development. So real quick, we got to let you go here. I know you got to go jump. You're going to the draft. You're going to cover the draft. I think that's what you're doing next, maybe, is a conversation with someone about the draft. But
assistant manager of the Capitals.
What are your big things that you're looking at from a big picture, and then for the Caps coming up here with the draft in the next couple of months?
So I think everyone who pays attention to hockey knows who's going first overall. I think a lot of people think they know who's going second overall, but I think things get a little interesting after Bedard. And this Matvei Michkov. I mean, there are a lot of question marks.
Yes.
So surrounding this player, but contractually, geopolitics. I mean, there's all sorts of things going on right now. But that dude's as good as they come, man. And I'm curious to see after Bedard's name is. I mean, that's going to be kind of anticlimactic. I mean, it's going to be cool to see him go up there. He's a generational player, best since McDavid. But then it's as soon as he gets his jersey and walks off, everyone in the building is going to go, Ducks are on the clock. What's going to happen here, right? And then, but I also think if Michkov drops, if he doesn't get picked there second or third, I think he might drop. And I don't think I have to tell you who I think would be the first in line to take a gamble on it, right? I mean, there's one team in the Capitals that has a track record of getting young Russian players out of their contracts. They did it last year with Ivan Miroshnichenko. I mean, he was signed with Omsk for another 2 years, and then magically he signs with the Capitals, after breaking his contract in Omsk. I don't know how those deals come about. I think I know how they work, but if he falls, I think Michkov is one hell of a player. And man, if you're a Caps fan, you got to hope he ends up here, because he'll expedite the retool that they're doing. To have a player of that caliber making $900,000 is just, I mean, that's what this team needs, right? That's what these top heavy teams need.
And that's what I wanted to ask you as a follow-up, and this will be the last one because you got to run. The Caps are retooling, rebuilding, reloading, whatever it might be. I'm sure they want to try to win before Ovi's done, as much as they want him to get the record. What can they do this? I mean, it's they've started a little later than I think most of us thought they should have. What are their prospects for being able to be competitive as he finishes his career, starting with this draft?
Scott, this is the summer where they have to figure things out. Like it's headed in the wrong direction right now. And the question becomes, can they make the right moves? They want to make moves. They're making calls. They're trying to leverage some players that, that they think no longer fit what they need. Players are hard to move these days. It's just these blockbuster trades like the Tkachuk deal last year, like they happen every so often, but they're so hard because of the salary cap. And they're even harder for teams like the Caps that are up against the ceiling. And so I think at the start of the offseason, everyone's mad and emotional. Oh, we didn't make the playoffs. We're going to trade everyone. We're going to fire everyone.
Okay. They said that when they won.
Right. Yeah. And then you look around and you're like, well, you know what? Kuzi definitely bailed on Laviolette, but we got a new coach. Maybe this guy can connect with them. Anthony Mantha had a tough time fitting into that system and didn't feel comfortable with the coach. Maybe this new guy can find a way. Oh, and also it's his contract year. Maybe this is the year that he'll pop 25 and get 25 assists. My initial gut feeling was, oh, they're going to get some business done. They're going to make some big trades. Now I'm starting to think that they're going to kind of not nibble around the edges. I think there might be one trade that raises your eyebrows, but it's not going to be a total, revamping of the roster. It's going to be, a medium-sized trade, a medium-sized signing, and hopefully they can get lucky in the draft and get someone who can compete next year. And Michkov, I think, is that guy.
Awesome. Well, hey, we're going to let you run, go do your day job. Appreciate having you. Hopefully we're going to do this again in the future. Mazzo and I will be back to wrap it up with the closing segment. DMVprospects.com for our stuff. DMV Hockey on Twitter. Anything you need to plug there, Tarik? Anything you want to say?
I just looking for my coverage next week. I'll be in Nashville and I'll be writing about what I'm hearing about the Capitals, and I'll do a full breakdown on whomever they end up going with.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. We look forward to doing it again soon, and have fun in Nashville. Great town.
Thanks for having me, guys.